Hey, you all. Settle in now, get comfortable, let your eyes close gently if you like, and just listen as I take you back to a different time. A different world, the world of the 1980s. A decade of big hair and bigger ambitions, of neon lights reflecting off rain-soaked streets, of cassette tapes clicking into place, and the low hum of a late-night city that never truly sleeps. Tonight we are going to hear a story, a true story from that era, a story about a simple plan, a plan that should have been easy, a plan that was supposed to be in and out, no complications, just a straightforward Grand Theft Auto, the kind of job that happens 1,000 times a night in any major city. But this particular one, went sideways in a way that would change lives forever, a story that begins not with violence or shouting, but with the quiet desperation of a young man named Vincent who thought he saw an opportunity where others saw only risk. Vincent was 22 years old in the spring of 1983, a kid really, with soft hands and a nervous habit of chewing on his thumbnail when he was thinking, which was often. He lived in a small apartment above a laundromat in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, the kind of place where the smell of detergent and warm cotton followed you up the narrow staircase and seeped into your clothes no matter how careful you were. The walls were thin. You could hear your neighbors arguing in Italian or laughing too loudly on a Saturday night. You could hear the thump of a washing machine going off balance and the weary sigh of the super as he went down to fix it for the third time that week. Vincent worked days at a garage on 86th Street, a place called Sal's Auto Body, though Sal hadn't been seen in years, and everyone knew the real owner was a man named Frankie the Lip who never got his hands dirty, but always got his cut. Vincent was good with cars, had a natural feel for engines, could diagnose a problem just by listening to the way a motor turned over, a gift he had picked up from his father who had been a mechanic before a heart attack took him when Vincent was just 16. But being good with cars at Sal's didn't pay much, barely enough for rent and groceries, and the occasional six-pack of beer to share with his friend Joey on a Friday night. There was no path forward there, no promotion waiting, no raise coming, just the slow grind of each day bleeding into the next, the smell of gasoline and grease becoming a permanent part of your skin, your hair, your very being. Vincent dreamed of more, not of mansions or fancy cars necessarily, but of breathing room, of not having to calculate whether he could afford both milk and bread on the same shopping trip, of taking a girl to dinner without checking the prices twice before ordering. He watched the other guys sometimes, the ones who didn't work regular jobs, the ones who wore silk shirts under their leather jackets even in winter, who drove Cadillacs with white wall tires and gold trim, who never seemed to worry about money because money was not something they earned. It was something they moved, something that flowed to them through channels invisible to ordinary people. He wasn't stupid. He knew where that money came from. He knew the stories. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the stories, but knowledge and participation are two different things, and Vincent had always stayed on the right side of that line, the safe side, the boring side. Until one Tuesday evening in late April when everything changed because of a car. It was a Tuesday because Tuesdays were slow at the garage, midweek lull, just a few oil changes and a brake job that Joey was handling, while Vincent swept the bay for the third time that afternoon. The concrete floor already clean, but the ritual of sweeping gave him something to do with his hands. The sun was low in the sky, casting long orange shadows across the oil-stained pavement outside, and the air had that particular quality of early spring in New York, a hint of warmth carrying the distant smell of roasting chestnuts from a vendor 10 blocks away, mixed with the ever-present scent of exhaust and garbage. That was when the car pulled in, a black Cadillac Eldorado, the kind with the sharp lines and the wide white wall tires, the kind of car that looked expensive even when it was standing still. It rolled to a stop with a soft hiss of hydraulics, the engine a quiet purr rather than a roar, and for a moment no one got out. Vincent stopped sweeping and just watched, something about the car making him pause, an instinct he couldn't name. Then the driver's door opened and a man emerged. Not a young man, maybe 50 or so, with thick silver hair combed straight back and a face that had seen things. Not necessarily bad things, but things that had left their mark. A network of fine lines around the eyes. A stillness in the way he moved that spoke of confidence, of being accustomed to respect. He wore a dark suit, not flashy, but well cut, and polished shoes that clicked softly on the concrete. He didn't look at Vincent right away, just stood for a moment stretching his back as if the drive had been long. Then he turned and nodded toward the passenger side. Another man got out then, younger, maybe 30, with a tight haircut and shoulders that seemed too broad for his jacket. A man who moved with a kind of coiled energy, eyes constantly scanning, taking in everything, the garage, the street, Vincent himself. This was the muscle, Vincent thought immediately. He had seen enough movies and heard enough stories to recognize the type. The older man walked toward Vincent, hands in his pockets, a small smile playing on his lips. "Afternoon," he said, voice calm, measured. "Afternoon," Vincent replied, leaning on his broom. The older man gestured toward the Cadillac with a tilt of his head. "Something's not right with the transmission," he said. "Makes a noise when I shift into third. Like a whine. You boys know transmissions." It wasn't a question. "We can take a look," Vincent said. The older man nodded slowly. "Good, I need it by tomorrow morning, early." Vincent felt a flicker of concern. "Tomorrow morning is tight," he said. "We have a few jobs ahead." The older man's smile didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted just slightly, a cooling. "I think you can make time," he said softly. "My name is Mr. Morty, and I would consider it a personal favor if you made time." Vincent knew the name then. Everyone knew the name Morty, not the biggest family in the city, but respected, established, the kind of people who didn't need to shout to be heard. He felt his throat go dry. "Yes, sir," he said. "We'll make time." Mr. Morty nodded again, satisfaction returning to his eyes. "Good boy." He turned and walked back to the car, the younger man falling in beside him. They got in, the engine purred to life, and the Cadillac rolled smoothly out of the bay and disappeared down the street. Vincent stood there for a full minute after they were gone, the broom still in his hands, heart beating a little faster than normal. Joey came out from the office then, wiping his hands on a rag. "Who was that?" "Morty," Vincent said quietly. Joey's eyes widened. "No kidding. What did he want?" "Transmission noise. Wants it fixed by tomorrow morning." Joey whistled low. "Well, we better get to work then." But when they popped the hood and started looking things over, there was no noise, no problem with the transmission at all. Everything was perfect, pristine, even the engine compartment cleaner than most people's kitchens. They checked everything twice, test drove the car around the block, shifted through all the gears, nothing, not a whisper of a problem. Joey scratched his head. Maybe he imagined it. Or maybe he just wanted an excuse to leave the car here, Vincent said. And as soon as the words left his mouth, he knew they were true. This was a test, a simple test. Leave a valuable car at a small garage overnight and see what happens. See if it's still there in the morning, see if the mechanics are honest or if they get ideas. It was an old trick, Vincent realized. A way for men like Morty to gauge the character of the people in his territory without ever having to ask a direct question. They parked the Cadillac in the far bay, locked the garage doors and went home. But Vincent couldn't stop thinking about that car, about the weight of it sitting there in the dark garage, about what it represented. Not just a car, but access, a key to a different life. A life where you didn't sweep floors for a living, where you didn't count pennies at the grocery store. And the crazy part was, the opportunity was just sitting there, unlocked really, because Vincent had seen where Joey put the keys, on the pegboard behind the desk, second hook from the left, right next to the keys for the tow truck. All night Vincent lay in bed staring at the water-stained ceiling of his apartment, listening to the hum of the laundromat below, the occasional shout from the street, the distant wail of a siren. His mind raced with scenarios, with justifications. It's not really stealing, he told himself. It's borrowing just for a few hours, take it out, drive it around, feel what it's like to be behind the wheel of something that nice, then bring it back before anyone notices, before the garage opens in the morning. Mr. Morty wouldn't even know. He'd come get his car, drive away, never suspect a thing. Where's the harm? And even if he did suspect, what could he do? Accuse a couple of mechanics without proof? Vincent knew this was dangerous thinking. He knew the stories about what happened to people who crossed men like Morty, but the desire was a physical thing in his chest, a tightness, a longing that overrode caution. By 3 in the morning, he had made his decision. He would do it. Just a quick drive, just long enough to feel the power of that engine, to sit in those soft leather seats, to pretend for one night that he was someone else, someone with options, with power, with respect. He got up before dawn, dressed quietly, and walked the 6 blocks to the garage in the pale blue light of approaching sunrise. The streets empty except for a few delivery trucks and the occasional night shift worker heading home. His hands were shaking slightly as he unlocked the side door of the garage, the familiar click of the lock sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Inside, the air was cool and still, smelling of oil and metal and quiet. The Cadillac sat exactly where they had left it, a dark shape in the dim light filtering through the high windows. Vincent's heart hammered against his ribs as he walked toward it, each step feeling both inevitable and impossible. He reached the pegboard, took the keys, their metal cool against his palm. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather sighing softly under his weight, and inserted the key. The engine turned over on the first try, a deep, smooth rumble that vibrated through the whole car, a sound of pure power held in perfect check. He pulled out of the garage slowly, carefully, glancing both ways on the empty street before turning left toward the Belt Parkway. The city was just beginning to wake up, a few lights on in apartment buildings, the occasional bus lumbering down an avenue, but the parkway itself was nearly empty, a ribbon of asphalt stretching out before him under the soft pink light of dawn. He pressed the accelerator gently, and the big car responded instantly, surging forward with a quiet authority that made Vincent's breath catch in his throat. This was what he had wanted, this feeling of effortless power, of control, of moving through the world without friction. He drove for an hour, just driving, taking the parkway out toward Coney Island, then looping back through Bay Ridge, the sun rising fully now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He felt alive in a way he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. The wind through the open window, the smooth hum of the engine, the world passing by in a gentle blur. He was so caught up in the feeling that he didn't notice the car at first, the dark sedan that had been behind him for the last 10 minutes, matching his speed, never getting closer, never falling back. It was only when he took an exit toward Gravesend that he saw it in his rearview mirror, saw it take the same exit, and a cold knot began to form in his stomach. He told himself he was being paranoid, just a guy going to work early, but then the sedan sped up slightly, closing the distance to about 50 yards and stayed there. Vincent's hands tightened on the wheel. He made a sudden turn onto a side street, then another, trying to lose the car, but it followed effortlessly as if anticipating his moves. Panic began to rise in his throat, hot and metallic. He pressed the accelerator harder, the Cadillac responding with that same smooth power, but the sedan stayed with him, now only 30 yards back. He turned again, tires squealing slightly on the damp pavement, and that was when he saw the police car parked at the intersection ahead, lights dark, an officer inside drinking coffee. Relief washed over him for a split second, then vanished as he realized he was driving a stolen car, a car belonging to a known mob figure, and he had no license for it, no explanation that would make sense. He slammed on the brakes, the Cadillac shuddering to a stop, and in that same moment the sedan behind him stopped too, and 2 men got out, not police officers. The younger man from yesterday, the muscle, and another man Vincent didn't recognize, both moving with that same calm certainty. The police officer looked up from his coffee, saw the scene unfolding, and made a decision not to get involved, turning his gaze back to the dashboard. The 2 men approached the Cadillac slowly, deliberately. Vincent sat frozen behind the wheel, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his temples. The younger man reached Vincent's window and tapped on the glass with a knuckle. Tap, tap, tap. A soft, polite sound that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. Vincent rolled down the window, his hand trembling so badly he fumbled with the crank. "Morning," the younger man said, his voice pleasant, almost friendly. "Enjoying the car?" Vincent couldn't speak, just shook his head mutely. The man smiled, a thin expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Morty would like it back now, and he would like to speak with you." He opened the car door and gestured for Vincent to get out. There was no point in running, no point in arguing. Vincent knew that instantly. He stepped out of the car, his legs feeling like water, and stood on the sidewalk as the two men flanked him. The younger one patted him down quickly, professionally, removing Vincent's wallet, his keys, the pack of cigarettes in his shirt pocket. Then they walked him to the sedan, placed him gently but firmly in the back seat, and got in front. They didn't blindfold him, didn't tie his hands, which should have been reassuring but wasn't, because it suggested they didn't think he was a threat, and that was somehow worse. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, heading north through neighborhoods Vincent recognized, but had never had reason to visit in this context, finally pulling into the gravel parking lot of a warehouse near the docks in Red Hook. The building was nondescript, gray concrete with few windows, the kind of place that existed all over the city, unnoticed and unremarkable. They led Vincent inside, through a heavy metal door that opened onto a vast empty space, concrete floor stretching away into dimness, the air smelling of salt and rust and old wood. In the center of the space, under a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, sat a folding table and two chairs. And sitting in one of those chairs was Mr. Morty, looking exactly as he had the day before, calm, composed, sipping from a paper cup of coffee. He looked up as Vincent approached, his expression unreadable. "Ah, Vincent," he said. "Or may I call you Vincent?" Vincent nodded, unable to form words. "Please sit," Morty said, gesturing to the empty chair. Vincent sat, his back straight, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Morty studied him for a long moment, sipping his coffee, the only sound in the vast space the soft hum of a distant generator. "You like my car," he said finally, his tone conversational, almost gentle. Vincent swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what I was thinking." Morty nodded slowly. "That's what they all say, but you were thinking something. Everyone thinks something when they do something like this." "What were you thinking, Vincent?" Vincent took a shaky breath. "I just wanted to drive it. Just once. I didn't mean to steal it. I was going to bring it back." Morty leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "Do you have any idea," he said softly, "how many people would kill for that car? Not to drive it, to own it, to have it as a symbol of what they've achieved. And you, a boy who sweeps floors, thought you could just take it for a joyride, like it was nothing." Vincent felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm really sorry." Morty sat back again, studying Vincent's face, the genuine fear there, the youth, the stupidity of it all. He sighed, a long, slow exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of many years, many decisions. "I could have you killed," he said, and his voice was so matter-of-fact that Vincent believed him completely. "It would be easy. No one would ask questions. A body in the harbor gone by morning tide, but that seems wasteful. You're young, stupid but young, and you have a skill with cars. I've made some inquiries this morning. You're good with engines, better than good." Vincent just stared at him, not understanding where this was going. Morty continued, "I have a problem, Vincent, a small problem. Persistent. A rival of mine, a man named Tony the Knife, has been moving merchandise through a garage in Canarsie, using it as a front. My people have tried to deal with it, but Tony is careful. He has alarms, he has guards, he has connections with the local police. It's become an irritation." Morty paused, letting the words sink in. "I need someone who knows cars, who can get into that garage without setting off alarms, who can disable a vehicle quietly, efficiently. Someone no one would notice. Someone like you." Vincent felt a cold dread spreading through his chest. "You want me to sabotage his cars?" Morty smiled faintly. "Not sabotage, disable, temporarily, create a problem that requires attention. While his people are distracted, my people can move in. It's a simple job, in and out. No violence, just technical work." Vincent shook his head slowly. I can't. I'm not that kind of person. Morty's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. You are exactly that kind of person, Vincent. You proved that this morning when you stole my car. The line is already crossed. The only question now is which side of it you stand on, with me or against me. There is no middle ground. Vincent felt the truth of those words settle over him like a heavy blanket. He had made his choice the moment he turned the key in that ignition. He just hadn't known it at the time. There was no going back to the life he had before, no pretending this hadn't happened. The only choices now were bad and worse. What happens if I say no? Vincent asked, his voice barely a whisper. Morty took another sip of coffee. Let's not discuss hypotheticals. The job is tonight, 9 o'clock. A man will pick you up outside your apartment. You will do the job, and when it is done, you will have a new position. Better pay, better prospects, or you will have nothing, not even a grave. The choice is yours. But really, Vincent, it is not a choice at all. Vincent sat there for a long time after Morty left, the two men standing silently at the edges of the room, giving him space to think, to come to the inevitable conclusion. He thought about running, disappearing, taking a bus to another state, starting over somewhere no one knew his name. But he knew it wouldn't work. Men like Morty had eyes everywhere. They would find him, and the punishment for running would be far worse than the punishment for compliance. He thought about going to the police, but that was even more foolish. The police couldn't protect him, and even if they could, he would spend years in witness protection, always looking over his shoulder, always afraid. No, there was only one path forward, the path Morty had laid out for him, a path that led deeper into the world he had only ever observed from a distance. He thought about his father then, about the man who had taught him to respect machines, to understand them, to treat them with care. His father would be disappointed, he knew that, but his father had also taught him to survive, to do what was necessary to keep going when the world gave you no easy choices. Survival sometimes required compromises. His father had said once after losing a job unfairly, compromises that leave marks on your soul but keep your body breathing. Vincent made his decision not with courage or conviction, but with a quiet resignation, the understanding that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. He would do the job. He would disable the car. He would take the money. He would become the kind of person who did these things. The man who picked him up that night was the younger one from before, the muscle, who introduced himself only as Carlo. He drove the same dark sedan, the interior smelling of leather and cigarettes. He didn't speak much during the drive to Canarsie, just gave Vincent instructions in a low voice when they arrived. The garage was exactly as Morty had described, a modest place on a quiet street, a neon sign in the window advertising oil changes and brake repairs. Through the front window they could see a late-model Buick parked inside, the target. Carlo had a key, slipped it into the lock with practiced ease, and they stepped inside. The garage was dark except for the glow of the streetlights through the windows, the air thick with the familiar smells of oil and rubber and metal. Vincent's hands trembled as he approached the Buick, a tool bag Carlo had given him hanging heavy at his side. He popped the hood, the latch releasing with a soft click that seemed deafening in the silence. The engine was clean, well-maintained, the kind of car that belonged to someone who took pride in his possessions. Vincent's father's voice echoed in his mind. Treat every machine with respect, son, even the ones that aren't yours. He pushed the thought away and went to work, disconnecting a fuel line here, loosening a critical bolt there, creating a problem that would not be immediately obvious but would cause the engine to stall within a mile of starting, a problem that would require a mechanic's attention, that would draw the owner out of the building to investigate. It took him 20 minutes, each second stretching into an eternity, every creak of the building, every distant car horn making his heart jump. When he was finished, he closed the hood gently, wiped his hands on a rag, and nodded to Carlo. They left as quietly as they had come, locking the door behind them. Back in the sedan, driving away, Vincent expected to feel relief, but instead he felt only a deep, hollow emptiness, as if something essential had been carved out of him during those 20 minutes in the dark garage. Carlo drove him back to his apartment building, stopped at the curb. "You did good tonight," he said, his voice still calm, still pleasant. "Mr. Morty will be in touch." Vincent got out of the car without responding, walked up the stairs to his apartment, and lay down on his bed fully clothed. He didn't sleep that night. He just lay there in the dark, listening to the hum of the laundromat below, the same sound that had been his constant companion for years. But now it sounded different, alien, as if he were hearing it from a great distance, as if he were no longer truly part of the world that made that sound. The next morning, a plain envelope was slipped under his door. Inside was $500 in crisp bills and a note with a single address and a time, 7 o'clock tonight. No signature. Vincent went to work at the garage as usual, but everything felt different now. The sweep of the broom, the smell of the oil, the banter with Joey. It all seemed like a performance he was watching rather than participating in. Joey noticed something was off. "You okay, man? You look like you seen a ghost." Vincent forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep well." Joey nodded, accepting the explanation, and went back to his work. At 7 o'clock, Vincent went to the address from the note, a social club on 19th Avenue, the kind of place every neighborhood had, a storefront with a curtain over the window, old men playing cards inside, the smell of espresso and cigars drifting out onto the sidewalk. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room fell silent for a moment, all eyes turning to him. Then the conversations resumed, quieter now, more measured. Mr. Morty was sitting at a table in the back, playing cards with 2 other men. He looked up as Vincent approached, nodded slightly. "You came?" Vincent nodded. "I came." Morty gestured to an empty chair. "Sit. Have a coffee." Vincent sat. One of the other men poured him a small cup of thick black coffee from a silver pot. They didn't speak for several minutes, Morty finishing his hand of cards, winning with a quiet smile, collecting his winnings without gloating. When the hand was over, he turned his full attention to Vincent. "Tony the Knife's car broke down last night," he said softly. "Right where we wanted it. My boys were in and out in 3 minutes. No alarms, no witnesses. You have a gift, Vincent, a quiet gift." Vincent stared into his coffee cup. "I just know cars." Morty leaned forward. "Knowing cars is a skill. Knowing when and how to use that skill for purposes beyond simple repair, that is a talent. And talent should be rewarded." He slid an envelope across the table. $1,000 for your services and a proposition. I have a warehouse near the docks, imports and exports. The trucks that move the merchandise need maintenance. Regular, discreet maintenance. The current mechanic is getting old. He wants to retire to Florida. I need someone to replace him, someone trustworthy. Someone with your skills. The pay is good. $2,000 a week, cash, no questions asked. Vincent's mind reeled at the number. $2,000 a week was more than he made in a month at Sal's. It was life-changing money. It was also blood money. He knew that the merchandise moving through that warehouse was not legal goods. It was whatever men like Morty profited from: drugs, stolen property, guns. He didn't want to know the details. But the alternative was what? Going back to sweeping floors, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Morty to decide that Vincent knew too much, that he was a liability. There was no alternative. He took the envelope. "I'll do it." Morty smiled, a genuine smile this time, small but real. "Good. You won't regret this, Vincent. Starting tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Ask for Benny at the gate. He'll show you around." Vincent stood to leave, tucking the envelope into his pocket, feeling the weight of it against his leg. "One more thing," Morty said as Vincent reached the door. "The Cadillac, it's yours." Vincent turned, confused. "Sir, the Cadillac, consider it a signing bonus. It's parked around back. Keys are in the visor." Vincent couldn't speak. A car like that was worth more than he had made in his entire life. It was an absurd gift, a display of power so casual it was terrifying. "Thank you," he managed to say. Morty waved a hand dismissively. "Go on, enjoy it. But remember, Vincent, every gift comes with obligations. The car is yours as long as you remain useful, as long as you remain loyal. Understand?" Vincent understood perfectly. He understood that he was no longer a free man, that he had traded his freedom for comfort, his soul for security. He understood that the line he had crossed the night before was not just a line but a threshold, and he had passed through it into a new world with new rules, rules he was only beginning to comprehend. He walked around to the back of the building, and there it was, the black Cadillac Eldorado, gleaming under the streetlights, looking exactly as it had the day before, but now it was his. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against his back, inserted the key, and started the engine. The purr was the same, the power was the same, but the feeling was different now. Before it had been stolen pleasure, a brief taste of a life not his own. Now it was a cage, beautiful and comfortable, but a cage nonetheless, the gilded bars of obligation and fear. He drove home slowly, carefully, the big car gliding through the Brooklyn streets, drawing glances from pedestrians who saw not a scared kid but a man of means, a man to be respected or feared. He parked in front of his apartment building, the contrast between the car and the shabby building almost comical. He sat there for a long time with the engine off, watching the lights in the windows above, wondering if any of his neighbors were looking down at him, wondering who he was now, what he had become. He knew he should feel triumphant. He had gotten everything he thought he wanted: money, a nice car, a better job. But instead he felt only a profound sadness, a sense of loss for the person he had been just 48 hours earlier, a person who still had choices, who still had a clean conscience, who still believed that hard work and honesty were enough to build a life. That person was gone now, replaced by someone harder, smarter in certain ways, more cautious, but also more compromised, more aware of the darkness that lived just beneath the surface of ordinary life. He got out of the car and went upstairs to his apartment, the envelope of cash heavy in his pocket, the keys to the Cadillac heavy in his hand. He lay down on his bed again, fully clothed, and this time he did sleep, a deep, exhausted sleep filled with dreams of engines that wouldn't start, of roads that led nowhere, of being chased through endless garages by faceless men who knew his name. When he woke the next morning, the sun was high, the day already advanced. He showered, dressed in clean clothes, and went downstairs to the Cadillac. As he slid behind the wheel, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, a small black device tucked under the dash near the steering column, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A tracking device. Of course. Morty trusted him, but not completely. No one in that world trusted completely. Vincent smiled, a thin, bitter smile. He started the car and drove to the docks, to the warehouse, to his new life. The job was exactly as described, maintaining a fleet of trucks, keeping them running smoothly, quietly, efficiently. Benny, the man at the gate, was an older Sicilian with a kind face and sad eyes who showed Vincent around without asking questions, as if he had seen this story play out many times before. The work was easy for Vincent, familiar, comforting in its way. The language of engines was the same whether the cargo was legal or not. He made friends with the drivers, tough men with soft spots for their trucks, men who appreciated a mechanic who understood their machines. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Vincent settled into his new life. He moved out of the apartment above the laundromat into a small house in Diker Heights, nothing fancy but his own, with a driveway for the Cadillac. He dated a girl named Maria who worked as a secretary in a law office, a sweet girl who liked his quiet nature and didn't ask too many questions about his work. He sent money to his mother who lived in Florida, told her he had gotten a promotion, which was technically true. On the surface, his life was better than he had ever imagined it could be. But beneath the surface, things were different. He noticed the way people looked at him now, not with casual indifference, but with a kind of wary respect. Shopkeepers giving him the good cuts of meat without asking, bartenders pouring his drinks a little heavier, neighbors nodding to him on the street with a deference that felt both good and terrible. He was part of the machine now, a small cog but part of it nonetheless, and the machine demanded loyalty, demanded silence, demanded participation in its rhythms of violence and retribution, even if that participation was only passive, only through silence. He learned to recognize the signs, the sudden tension in a room when a name was mentioned, the way conversations would stop when he entered a place, not because of him personally, but because of who he worked for. He learned to keep his head down, to do his job, to collect his money, to ask no questions. It was a good life in many ways, comfortable, secure, but it was also a narrow life, a life lived within invisible walls that he had helped build himself the night he decided to take that car for a drive. And sometimes, late at night, he would lie awake next to Maria, who slept peacefully beside him, and he would think about that morning, that perfect spring morning when he had driven the Cadillac along the empty parkway as the sun rose over the city, and he would wonder if that moment of pure joy had been worth the price he had paid for it, if any moment of joy could be worth the slow erosion of your own soul. He never found an answer to that question. He just kept waking up each morning, going to the warehouse, fixing the trucks, coming home to Maria, living his comfortable, compromised life. The black Cadillac always parked in the driveway, a constant reminder of the choice he had made, the line he had crossed, the person he used to be, and the person he had become. All because of a simple grand theft auto that had gone wrong in the most unexpected way possible. Not with violence or prison time, but with opportunity, with temptation. With the slow, quiet corruption of a good man who thought he was just taking a shortcut to a better life, but was really just walking willingly into a cage of his own making. A cage he would never truly escape. Not even years later, when Morty was gone, and the organization had crumbled, and Vincent was an old man telling this story to anyone who would listen, still wondering if that drive at dawn had been worth it, still hearing the purr of that engine in his dreams, still feeling the weight of those keys in his hand, heavy with promise and with doom. The story of Vincent and the Cadillac is not a story about good and evil in any simple sense. It is a story about choices and consequences, about how the smallest decision made in a moment of weakness or desire can echo through an entire life, reshaping it in ways you cannot possibly foresee in that moment. It is a story about the seduction of power, even small power, even borrowed power, and how easily we can justify crossing lines we once believed were uncrossable. Vincent was not a bad man, not at his core, but he was a weak man in a particular moment, and weakness in the face of temptation is often all it takes to set a life on a new trajectory. The Mafia did not force him into their world with guns or threats, not really. They simply presented him with an opportunity after he had already demonstrated his willingness to break the rules, and he walked through the door they opened for him because the alternative seemed worse, because the reward seemed worth the risk, because he believed, as so many believe, that he could dip his toe into darkness and emerge unchanged. But darkness does not work that way. Darkness stains. It seeps into the cracks in your character and widens them. It teaches you new ways of thinking, new justifications, new hierarchies of value where loyalty to the organization trumps loyalty to your own conscience, where survival trumps morality, where the comfort of the moment trumps the health of the soul. Vincent survived. He even prospered in his own way. But he lost something essential in the process, something he would spend the rest of his life trying to name, trying to recover, trying to pretend he never really had in the first place. And that is perhaps the truest tragedy of stories like this. Not the violence or the criminality, but the quiet internal losses, the slow surrender of self that happens not in dramatic moments but in small accommodations, small compromises, each one seeming insignificant at the time, but together adding up to a complete transformation. Vincent became a different person that spring, not because he wanted to, but because he saw no other path forward, and in seeing no other path, he failed to imagine one, failed to fight for one, failed to understand that sometimes the hardest choice is the only right one, and that the easy path, the comfortable path, the path of least resistance, often leads to a destination you never intended to reach. The Cadillac sat in his driveway for 20 years, through marriages and divorces, through good times and bad, through the slow decline of the organization he served, through his own slow aging. He never sold it, never traded it in, never even considered getting rid of it. It was his anchor to that moment of choice, his reminder of the price of compromise, his beautiful, terrible monument to the day he decided that a few minutes of joy behind the wheel of someone else's car was worth the slow death of his own soul. And on quiet nights when the neighborhood was still and the moon was full, he would sometimes go out to the car, run a hand over its sleek black hood, remember the feel of that steering wheel in his hands, the purr of that engine, the freedom of that empty parkway at dawn, and he would wonder if he would make the same choice again, knowing what he knew now. And the terrible, honest answer was that he probably would, because that is the nature of temptation. It does not lose its power with hindsight. It only gains a deeper, more tragic resonance, becoming not just a mistake but a defining moment, the pivot point on which an entire life turns, for better or worse. And in Vincent's case, mostly for worse, though he would never admit that to anyone, not even to himself. Not even in the deepest quiet of the night when there was no one left to impress and nothing left to protect but the fragile fiction of a life well lived. And so the story ends not with a bang but with a whisper, not with justice or redemption but with quiet resignation, with an old man and his memories and a black Cadillac sitting in a driveway under the Brooklyn stars, a monument to a choice made long ago on a spring morning when the world seemed full of possibilities, and a young man with soft hands and a nervous habit of chewing his thumbnail thought he saw an opportunity where others saw only risk, and reached for it without understanding that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again, and some prices, once paid, can never be refunded. Settle back now, let the day slip away from you. Let your breathing slow and deepen as we return once more to that hazy landscape of the 1980s, to the shadowed corners of cities where men moved with purpose but without hurry, where loyalty was currency and silence was survival. Tonight we continue our journey with another story, another true story from that era, this one about a man who never carried a gun, never ordered a hit, never sat at the big table where decisions were made. This is the story of a low-level crook, a man who existed in the spaces between the important players, a man named Leo who understood early on that in the world of organized crime, the safest place to be was not at the top where everyone was watching, but in the middle shadows where you could see without being seen, where you could hear without being heard, where your value came not from power but from usefulness, from reliability, from the quiet competence that made the machinery of the organization turn smoothly without anyone needing to think about the gears. Leo was 34 years old in the fall of 1985, a man who had learned to make himself indispensable through a series of small services that added up to something larger than any single task might suggest. He ran errands that required discretion. He delivered packages that were never opened. He sat in cars outside buildings for hours at a time watching entrances and exits, nodding license plates, timing routines, reporting back with precise details that others would use to make decisions he would never be privy to. He was a watcher, a listener, a doer of small things that enabled big things to happen elsewhere. He lived in a modest apartment on the third floor of a walk-up in Carroll Gardens. Not poor but not flashy either, a deliberate choice, because flashy attracted attention and attention was dangerous. His apartment had beige walls and second-hand furniture, and a single photograph on the mantelpiece of his mother who had died 5 years earlier, a woman who had worked as a seamstress her entire life, and who had raised Leo alone after his father disappeared when Leo was 7, a disappearance that was never explained, but was understood by everyone in the neighborhood to be permanent. Leo never spoke of his father, never asked questions, never showed curiosity about where the man had gone or why he had left. Some silences were protective. He had learned that early. Some questions were better left unasked. His work for the organization began not through ambition, but through circumstance, through a series of small connections that led naturally from one thing to another, until one day he realized he was part of something larger than himself without ever having made a conscious decision to join. It started when he was 22, working as a stock boy at a grocery store owned by a man named Uncle Tony, a distant relative by marriage who was respected in the neighborhood not because he was feared, but because he was fair, because he paid on time, because he remembered people's names and their children's birthdays. Uncle Tony needed someone to drive his daughter to school 3 mornings a week when his regular driver was sick, and Leo, who had a clean license and a reliable car, agreed to help. The daughter was 16, sharp-eyed and quiet, and she never spoke much during those drives, but she observed everything, and apparently she observed that Leo was punctual, careful, and discreet. A month later, Uncle Tony asked Leo to deliver a package to a restaurant in Bay Ridge. Nothing complicated, just drop it off with the hostess and leave. Leo did it without asking what was in the package, without lingering, without making conversation. The next week there was another delivery, then another. Soon Leo was making 2 or 3 deliveries a week, always to legitimate seeming businesses, always with instructions that were simple and clear. He was paid $20 per delivery, good money for a young man with no special skills, and he never spent it frivolously, always saving half, always keeping his life modest and unremarkable. 2 years passed this way, Leo working his day job at the grocery store while building this quiet side work that required nothing more than reliability and silence. Then one evening, Uncle Tony called him into the back office after closing time. The office was small, smelling of cigar smoke and old wood, a single desk crowded with papers and a rotary phone with a long coiled cord. Uncle Tony sat behind the desk, not smiling but not stern either, just thoughtful. "Leo," he said, "you have been good to us. You have been reliable, we appreciate that." Leo nodded, not knowing what else to do. "There is a man," Uncle Tony continued, "a man named Dominic who works with us in certain matters. He needs someone to help with his business. Not difficult work, just presence, just reliability. You would still keep your job here. This would be evenings and weekends. The pay would be better. $200 a week to start." Leo felt his heart beat a little faster at the number, but he kept his face neutral. "What kind of work?" "Dominic runs a social club. Sometimes he needs someone to sit at a table, look like a customer, listen to conversations without appearing to listen. Sometimes he needs packages moved from one place to another, always legal on the surface, always deniable if questions are asked. You would never carry a weapon. You would never be asked to use violence. Your value is your discretion, your silence. Can you be silent, Leo?" Leo thought of his father's disappearance, of the unspoken rules of the neighborhood, of the way some men lived long lives while others vanished overnight. He thought of his mother working her fingers raw at a sewing machine to keep food on the table. "Yes," he said, "I can be silent." Uncle Tony studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Good. Dominic will contact you. Remember this, Leo. In our world, the mouth that flaps gets taped shut. Not always literally, sometimes just professionally, sometimes socially, but always effectively. Your silence is your shield. Your reliability is your sword, but mostly your silence." Leo understood. He had always understood. Some lessons are learned before they are taught. Dominic was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and thick glasses that magnified his eyes, making them seem larger than they were, more observant. He owned a social club on Henry Street called the Maple Leaf. Though no one called it that, everyone just called it Dominic's place. It was a narrow storefront with a curtain over the window, a few tables inside, a bar along one wall, the smell of espresso and cigarette smoke hanging permanently in the air. Old men played cards in the back, younger men came and went with purpose. Conversations happened in low tones that stopped when strangers entered and resumed only after they had been assessed and deemed harmless. Leo's first job was simple. Sit at table 3 near the window every Tuesday and Thursday evening from 7 to 10. Order a coffee. Read a newspaper. Listen to the conversations at the next table. Report anything about shipments, about police, about rival families. Nothing else mattered. Leo did this for 3 months without hearing anything significant, but Dominic never complained, never suggested the work was wasted. He paid Leo $200 every Friday in crisp bills tucked inside a plain envelope, and he treated Leo with a quiet respect that felt genuine. This was Leo's education, sitting at that table night after night, learning to listen without appearing to listen, learning to separate important information from gossip, learning to read the subtle shifts in tone and body language that signaled when a conversation had turned from casual to consequential. He learned that men revealed more in what they did not say than in what they did say, that hesitation before answering a simple question often meant deception, that the men who spoke least often held the most power. He learned to recognize the different factions within the organization, the old guard who remembered the days before television and wiretaps, the younger men who wanted to expand into new territories, the cautious ones who preferred steady income over risky ventures. He never took notes, never wrote anything down. He committed everything to memory, a skill he had developed as a child when his mother would send him to the store with a long list of items and no paper to write them on. Memory was safer than paper. Paper could be found. Memory could only be taken under duress, and Leo had no intention of ever being in a position where duress was applied. After 6 months, Dominic gave him a new assignment. A warehouse near the Red Hook docks received shipments every Thursday evening around 9 o'clock. Leo's job was to park his car down the street, observe who arrived, what vehicles they drove, how long they stayed, whether they were met by anyone already at the warehouse. Again, simple work. Again, no questions asked about what was being shipped. Again, payment in cash every Friday. Leo did this for 8 months, building a mental map of the organization's logistics, learning which men handled which operations, noticing patterns that no one had asked him to notice, but that he recorded anyway because noticing was his job, his purpose, his value. He never interfered, never approached anyone, never made himself visible. He was a ghost, a pair of eyes in a parked car, a presence so unremarkable that no one ever looked twice in his direction. This was his genius, if it could be called genius. He understood that in a world of loud men making loud threats and displaying loud wealth, the ability to be invisible was the rarest and most valuable skill of all. In the spring of 1982, something changed. A new player entered the scene. A man named Vincent Scarpa who had moved up from Philadelphia with ambitions larger than his experience justified. Scarpa was flashy, drove a white Cadillac with gold trim, wore loud suits and gold chains, surrounded himself with young, aggressive men who carried themselves with attention that announced their readiness for violence. The old guard disliked him immediately. Dominic especially distrusted him. Scarpa began encroaching on territories that had been stable for decades, moving in on gambling operations in Bensonhurst, trying to muscle in on the numbers game in Bay Ridge, making noise where silence had always been the rule. Dominic called Leo into the back room of the social club one evening in May. "Scarpa is a problem," he said without preamble. "Not yet a serious problem, but a potential problem. He is meeting with 2 of our men tomorrow night at a restaurant in Sheepshead Bay. I need to know what they discuss." Leo nodded. "Which restaurant?" "The Neptune, 7:30. Scarpa will arrive first. He always arrives first to inspect the location. Sit at the bar, order a drink." "Listen." Leo did as instructed. The Neptune was a seafood restaurant with dark wood paneling and red vinyl booths, the kind of place where families celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, where the waiters wore white jackets and knew regular customers by name. Leo arrived at 7:15, took a stool at the far end of the bar where he could see the main dining area without being obvious. He ordered a whiskey neat, though he rarely drank hard liquor, and sipped it slowly, making it last. Scarpa arrived at 7:22, exactly as Dominic had predicted. A tall man with a thick mustache and hair so black it had to be dyed, wearing a powder blue suit that seemed to glow under the restaurant's soft lighting. He was shown to a corner booth, sat with his back to the wall, eyes scanning the room constantly, a man who expected threats from every direction. At 7:45, two men Leo recognized from Dominic's club arrived, both mid-level associates named Frank and Joey. They slid into the booth across from Scarpa, shook hands briefly, ordered drinks. Leo positioned himself at the bar so he could hear their conversation without turning his head, a skill he had perfected over years of practice. The conversation began casually about sports, about the weather, about mutual acquaintances. Then Scarpa leaned forward, lowered his voice, and the real discussion began. He was offering Frank and Joey a deal. He had connections in Florida, he said, connections who could supply high-quality cocaine at prices below what the established networks were charging. All he needed was distribution in Brooklyn. Frank and Joey would handle the street-level operations, Scarpa would handle supply, profits would be split 60-40 in Scarpa's favor. Frank hesitated. "Dominic won't like this," he said. "Dominic is old school," Scarpa replied dismissively. "He thinks the world still runs on respect and handshakes. The world runs on product and profit. Times are changing." Frank shook his head slowly. "It's not that simple. The families have agreements, territories. You can't just move in." Scarpa smiled then, a thin, unpleasant expression. "The agreements were made by men who are getting old. Soon there will be new men making new agreements. Be on the right side of that change, Frank. Be on the side of progress." Joey said nothing, just stared into his drink, but Leo saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of risk against reward, the temptation of easy money against the security of established loyalty. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes, ending with handshakes and promises to think about the offer, but Leo knew what he had heard. He had heard the first cracks appearing in the foundation of the organization, cracks that could either be repaired quietly or could widen into chasms that would swallow men whole. He reported everything to Dominic the next morning, sitting in the same back room, speaking in a low, calm voice, omitting nothing, adding nothing, just the facts as he had heard them. Dominic listened without interrupting, his face unreadable behind those thick glasses. When Leo finished, Dominic was silent for a full minute, just staring at the wall as if seeing something far away. Then he nodded slowly. "You did well, Leo. This is valuable information. Scarpa thinks we are blind because we are quiet. He does not understand that quiet men see more than loud men. He thinks we are weak because we are patient. He does not understand that patience is a form of strength he has never learned." Dominic stood up, walked to a small safe in the corner of the room, opened it with a combination Leo did not try to memorize, and removed an envelope thicker than usual. $500, he said, placing it on the desk. "Your regular pay plus a bonus, and a new assignment. Starting tomorrow you will follow Scarpa, not every hour, just his movements between meetings, where he eats, who he meets, where he lives. I want a complete picture of his life, not for violence. Not yet, just knowledge. Knowledge is the foundation of all action. Without knowledge, action is just guessing, and guessing gets men killed." Leo took the envelope, felt the thickness of the cash inside, but felt no excitement, only the weight of responsibility. He understood that he was now part of something larger than simple observation. He was part of the machinery of response, of countermove, of the quiet war that would be fought not with guns but with information, with positioning, with the careful application of pressure at precisely the right moments. For 3 weeks Leo followed Scarpa, building a detailed map of the man's life. Scarpa lived in a rented apartment on Ocean Parkway, not a house, which suggested his wealth was newer than he pretended. He ate most nights at the same 3 restaurants, always sitting with his back to a wall, always scanning entrances. He met with 6 different men during those 3 weeks, all from outside the established families, all younger men with the same restless energy Scarpa himself possessed. He made regular trips to New Jersey, always alone, always returning within 4 hours. Leo documented everything in his mind, reporting to Dominic every Monday morning with precise details that painted a picture of a man building a rival organization from the edges, testing loyalties, offering incentives, looking for weaknesses in the established structure. Dominic listened to each report without comment, just nodding, absorbing the information, storing it away for future use. Then in early June, everything changed. Frank, one of the two men who had met with Scarpa at the Neptune, was found dead in his car parked outside his apartment building in Bensonhurst. A single gunshot to the back of the head, execution style. No witnesses, no shell casings. Professional work. The neighborhood went quiet. Conversations in Dominic's club became even more subdued. Men who had been friendly with Frank now avoided mentioning his name. Joey, the other man from the meeting, disappeared for 3 days, then reappeared looking 10 years older, his hands trembling slightly when he lit a cigarette. Leo knew without being told that Frank had made a choice, and that choice had cost him his life. He also knew that Joey had made a different choice, a choice of survival over ambition, and that choice had cost him something too, perhaps his peace of mind, perhaps his self-respect, but at least it had cost him only that. Dominic called Leo in the day after Frank's funeral. "Scarpa moves faster than I anticipated," he said, his voice tired. "Frank was weak. Joey is frightened. Both outcomes serve our purpose. Scarpa believes he has eliminated a threat and neutralized a witness. In reality, he has only demonstrated his volatility to everyone watching. Volatility is a weakness in our world, Leo. Men who act impulsively cannot be trusted. Men who kill unnecessarily attract attention. Scarpa has done both." Now we wait. Leo understood. This was the patience Dominic had spoken of, the strategic waiting that allowed an opponent's mistakes to accumulate until they became fatal. Scarpa, believing himself victorious, grew bolder. He began appearing at establishments owned by the organization, not causing trouble, just making his presence known, a silent challenge that everyone understood. He started dating a woman who had previously been involved with a made man from another family, a deliberate provocation. He bought a new car, a red Corvette, flashy and impractical, the kind of car that said, "Look at me," without words. Each move was a thread pulled from the fabric of his own safety, but he was too arrogant to see it. Leo continued his observations, now with a deeper understanding of what he was watching. He was not just documenting movements anymore. He was watching a man dig his own grave with every arrogant gesture, every unnecessary risk, every display of power that actually revealed weakness. In late July, Scarpa made his final mistake. He arranged a meeting with a corrupt customs official at a motel in Howard Beach, a meeting intended to secure protection for shipments coming through JFK Airport. Leo learned of the meeting through a waitress at a diner Scarpa frequented, a woman Leo had quietly cultivated as an information source by always leaving large tips and never asking direct questions, just listening when she volunteered information about regular customers. The meeting was set for Thursday night at 9 o'clock, room 214 at the Seabreeze Motel. Leo reported this to Dominic on Wednesday evening. Dominic listened, then stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. "Thursday night," he said softly. 9 o'clock, room 214. Leo nodded. "Should I observe from outside?" "No," Dominic said, turning back to face him. "This time you will not observe. This time you will enable. I need you to do something for me, Leo. Something simple but important. At 8:30 tomorrow night, I need you to call the front desk of the Seabreeze Motel. Ask to speak with the manager. When he comes on the line, tell him there has been a complaint from a guest in room 216 about loud noises and possible drug activity in room 214. Be calm, be concerned, sound like a worried neighbor, then hang up. That is all." Leo understood immediately. The manager would investigate. The police would be called. Scarpa would be caught in a compromising situation with a government official. Not enough for a major conviction perhaps, but enough for embarrassment, for leverage, for the kind of scandal that would make his allies reconsider their loyalty. It was not violence. It was something more elegant, more permanent. It was the destruction of reputation, and in their world reputation was everything. Leo made the call at 8:28 on Thursday evening. He used a pay phone 3 blocks from his apartment, his voice calm and measured as he spoke to the motel manager, inventing a name when asked, hanging up before the man could ask follow-up questions. He walked home slowly, the summer night warm and humid around him. The streets alive with people enjoying the evening, children playing stickball in the street, old men sitting on folding chairs in front of their buildings. The ordinary life of the neighborhood continuing around him while he carried this secret knowledge of what was about to unfold. At 9:15, his phone rang. It was Dominic. "It is done," he said simply. The police arrived at 9:07. Scarpa and the official were detained for questioning. Nothing serious, but the official's superiors have been notified. His career is finished. Scarpa's reputation is damaged. His allies are already distancing themselves. He is finished, Leo, not dead, but finished, which is sometimes worse. Dominic paused, then continued in a softer voice. "You have served well, better than I anticipated when Uncle Tony first recommended you. You understand the value of silence. You understand that the most powerful actions are often the quietest. I have a new position for you if you want it. Still no violence, still no weapons, but more responsibility, more pay. $1,000 a week. You would coordinate information flow between different operations. You would be my eyes and ears across the city. You would never make decisions, but you would provide the information that allows decisions to be made wisely." Leo sat on the edge of his bed, the phone pressed to his ear, the weight of the offer settling over him. $1,000 a week was life-changing money. It was enough to buy a house, to support a family, to live comfortably for the rest of his life. But it was also a deeper commitment, a step further into the world he had only been skirting the edges of until now. There would be no going back after this. He would be a known quantity, a trusted associate, a man with value that could be exploited or eliminated depending on circumstances beyond his control. He thought of Frank dead in his car. He thought of Joey trembling as he lit a cigarette. He thought of Scarpa's arrogance leading to his downfall. He thought of his mother's hands, rough and scarred from decades of sewing, hands that had worked honestly for every dollar they earned. He thought of his father's disappearance, a silence that had shaped his entire life. And he made his decision not out of ambition or greed, but out of a quiet understanding that in the world he inhabited, survival required adaptation, required finding a niche where your particular skills could keep you safe while others took greater risks. His niche was observation. His value was discretion. His survival depended on never overreaching, never becoming so important that he was a threat, never becoming so visible that he was a target. "Yes," he said into the phone. "I will take the position." Dominic's voice was warm with approval. "Good. You are a smart man, Leo. Smart men survive in our world. Loud men and ambitious men make headlines. Smart men make money and live to spend it." The new position changed Leo's life in subtle but profound ways. He still lived in the same apartment, still drove the same modest car, still dressed without flash or statement. But his days took on a new rhythm. Mornings he spent at a small office Dominic maintained above a bakery in Carroll Gardens, a room with a desk, a telephone, and a wall map of Brooklyn covered in small colored pins that only Leo understood the meaning of. He would arrive at 8:30, brew coffee, review messages left by various contacts overnight, update the map with new information. Afternoons he would make rounds to different establishments, always varying his route, always parking a block away from his destination, always entering through different doors. He never carried a notebook. Everything went into his memory, organized into categories that made sense only to him. Evenings he would return to the office, compile his observations into a verbal report for Dominic, who would listen without interruption, asking occasional questions that revealed which pieces of information were most valuable. The work was monotonous to an outsider, but to Leo it was a kind of meditation, a daily practice of attention and retention that gave his life structure and purpose. He was never bored. There was always something to notice, some small detail that might later prove significant. A new face in a familiar place, a change in routine, a vehicle that appeared where it did not belong. He learned to read the city like a text, to see patterns in what others saw as chaos, to understand that human behavior follows rhythms even when people believe they are acting spontaneously. Years passed this way. 1983, 1984, 1985. Leo moved through the world like a ghost, present but not noticed, involved but not implicated, valuable but not vulnerable. He watched as younger men rose and fell, as territories shifted, as new technologies changed old methods, as the world around him evolved while the fundamental rules remained the same. Loyalty mattered, discretion mattered, reliability mattered. Everything else was temporary. In the winter of 1986, Dominic fell ill. Cancer, the doctors said, though no one in their world trusted doctors completely. Dominic grew thin and pale, his voice weakening, but his mind remained sharp, his judgment unclouded. He began grooming Leo for an even greater role, not as a decision-maker, but as the keeper of institutional memory, the man who knew who owed what to whom, who remembered agreements made a decade earlier, who understood the delicate balance of relationships that held the organization together. This was perhaps the most dangerous position of all, because knowledge itself was power, and power attracted attention. But Leo understood the danger and navigated it with the same caution that had kept him safe for so long. He never flaunted his knowledge. He never used it for personal advantage. He remained the quiet man in the corner, the reliable associate, the one who remembered everything but revealed only what was necessary. When Dominic died in March of 1987, there was a brief period of uncertainty, a jockeying for position among the younger men who believed the old ways were finished. But the older guard prevailed, and they recognized that Leo's value was too great to discard. They kept him in his position, gave him a small raise, treated him with the same respect Dominic had shown him. He had become part of the infrastructure, like the plumbing or the electrical wiring, invisible until it stopped working, and no one wanted to discover what happened when Leo stopped working. By 1989, Leo was 40 years old, a man who had spent nearly 2 decades in the shadows of organized crime without ever breaking a law himself, without ever witnessing violence firsthand, without ever carrying anything more dangerous than a pocket knife. He had money saved in banks under different names, enough to retire comfortably if he ever chose to, though retirement was a concept that did not exist in his world. Men did not retire. They either died in position or disappeared before death could find them. Leo thought sometimes about disappearing, about taking his savings, and moving to a small town in another state where no one knew his name or his history. But he knew such fantasies were dangerous. The organization had eyes everywhere. Men who tried to disappear were usually found, and their fates were never pleasant. Better to stay visible but unthreatening, to remain useful but never essential, to be the quiet man in the corner whose absence would be noticed but whose presence was never questioned. This was his strategy for survival, and it had served him well. One evening in October of 1989, as he sat in his usual booth at a diner in Park Slope, reviewing the day's observations in his mind before reporting to the new boss, a man named Sal who had taken Dominic's place, Leo noticed something unusual. A young man, maybe 25, sitting alone at the counter, wearing clothes that were too new, too clean for the neighborhood, staring at his coffee as if it held answers to questions he was afraid to ask. There was a tension in the young man's shoulders, a nervous energy that Leo recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who had just crossed a line, who had just made a decision that could not be undone, who was waiting for the consequences to arrive. Leo watched him for 10 minutes without appearing to watch, noting the way the young man jumped slightly when the door opened, the way his eyes darted to the entrance every 30 seconds, the way he kept one hand in his jacket pocket as if gripping something inside. Then the young man stood up abruptly, dropped a $5 bill on the counter, and walked out into the cool autumn evening. Leo paid his check, left a generous tip as always, and followed at a distance. He did not know why he followed. Curiosity, perhaps, or instinct, or simply the habit of observation that had become second nature. The young man walked 6 blocks to a narrow street in Gowanus, stopped in front of a modest brick building with a single light burning in an upstairs window, and stood there for a full minute as if gathering courage. Then he climbed the stairs to the second floor, knocked on the door, and disappeared inside. Leo waited across the street, leaning against a parked car, watching the building. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Then the door opened and the young man emerged, but he was not alone. 2 older men accompanied him, both dressed in dark suits despite the warm evening, both moving with the calm certainty of men accustomed to authority. They walked the young man to a black sedan parked at the curb, opened the rear door for him, and he got in without resistance. The sedan pulled away smoothly, heading north toward the Manhattan Bridge. Leo did not follow. He did not need to. He recognized one of the older men. It was Sal, his current boss, and he understood what he had witnessed. Another Vincent, another young man who had seen an opportunity where others saw only risk, who had reached for something beyond his station, who had been given a choice between cooperation and consequences. Leo felt a strange mixture of emotions. Pity for the young man, certainly, but also a kind of weary recognition. This was the cycle, endless and unchanging. Ambitious young men making reckless choices. Older men applying pressure until those choices were corrected or punished. The machinery of the organization grinding forward, consuming ambition, rewarding caution, eliminating threats before they could fully form. He thought of Scarpa, of Frank, of Joey, of Dominic, of his own father whose disappearance he had never fully understood but had always suspected was part of this same machinery. He thought of all the men who had passed through these streets over the decades, some surviving through caution, some falling through ambition, all of them subject to the same unspoken rules that Leo had learned to navigate with quiet competence. He walked home slowly that night, the autumn air cool against his face, the city lights reflecting in puddles left by an earlier rain. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as he had left it, neat and modest and unremarkable. He hung his coat in the closet, poured a glass of water from the tap, and sat in his armchair by the window. Below, the neighborhood continued its evening rhythms, people returning from work, children being called inside for dinner, the ordinary life of the city unfolding without awareness of the hidden structures that shaped it. Leo sat there for a long time, watching the lights in the buildings across the street blink on one by one as night deepened. He thought about the young man in the diner, about the choice he had just made, about the path that now lay before him. He thought about his own choices, made years earlier, choices that had led him to this quiet apartment, this modest life, this position of quiet influence that kept him safe while others took greater risks. He felt no regret. Regret was a luxury for men who had choices. Leo had made the best choices available to him at each moment, and those choices had kept him alive when others had fallen. That was enough. It had to be enough. He finished his water, placed the glass on the table beside his chair, and sat in the darkness as the city settled into night around him. A quiet man in a quiet apartment, a ghost in the machine, a keeper of secrets who understood that in the world of the Mafia, the lowest level was often the safest place to be, not because it offered power or glory, but because it offered survival, and survival, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. And so Leo's story is not a story of violence or dramatic confrontation. It is not a story of rise and fall, of ambition rewarded or punished in spectacular fashion. It is a quieter story, a more human story, about a man who understood his limitations and worked within them, who found a niche where his particular talents could keep him safe in a dangerous world, who survived not through strength or cunning, but through patience and observation, and the wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain silent. He was a low-level crook by any definition, but he was also something rarer in that world. A man who understood that the greatest power sometimes lies not in being seen, but in seeing, not in speaking, but in listening, not in acting but in waiting for the right moment to act. And in a world where so many men died young because they reached too high or moved too fast or spoke too freely, Leo's survival for decades in the heart of organized crime stands as its own kind of triumph, a testament to the power of quiet competence in a world that too often mistakes noise for strength. He never became rich beyond his needs. He never achieved fame or notoriety. He never sat at the big table where decisions were made. But he lived. He woke up each morning in his own bed. He drank his coffee at the same diner. He walked the same streets. He observed the same patterns. And when other men his age were visiting graves or attending funerals or looking over their shoulders with fear in their eyes, Leo walked through the world with his head up and his hands in his pockets, a quiet man who had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that sometimes the safest place in a dangerous world is not at the top looking down, but in the middle shadows, watching, waiting, surviving, one careful day at a time. And on quiet nights when the city slept around him, Leo would sometimes sit by his window and think about all the men who had passed through his life, the loud ones and the quiet ones, the ambitious ones and the cautious ones, the ones who had risen and the ones who had fallen, and he would feel a strange kind of peace, not the peace of innocence, for he was not innocent, but the peace of acceptance, the understanding that he had played the hand he was dealt as well as he could, that he had navigated the dangerous waters of his world with skill and caution, that he had survived not through luck but through wisdom, the wisdom to know his place and stay in it, the wisdom to value silence over speech, observation over action, survival over glory. And if that made him a low-level crook in the eyes of the world, so be it. He had seen what happened to the high-level crooks, and he had no desire to join them. He preferred his quiet apartment, his modest savings, his unremarkable life. He preferred to be the man no one noticed, the man who saw everything but revealed nothing, the man who understood that in the end, the only score that matters is whether you are still breathing when the final curtain falls. And Leo was still breathing. Night after night, year after year, decade after decade, he was still breathing, still watching, still remembering, a quiet ghost in the machine of organized crime, a low-level crook who understood that sometimes the lowest level is exactly where you need to be to see the whole picture clearly, to understand how the pieces fit together, to survive when others cannot, and to live a long life in a world where long lives are the rarest commodity of all.